I wrote a LinkedIn post a couple of weeks ago talking about the 6 type of consultants that I believe exist. And really and truly, if I'm honest with you, I'm really talking about the consultant mindset, which I've explained many times before, but for those of you who haven't seen it, in previous videos, that is an individual who can strategically solve a unique problem or a set of problems for a client using frameworks, methodologies, and problem solving skills. Okay. Of course, that embodies a whole set of different skill sets. But I believe there are at least 6 different types of consultant mindsets or consultants that exist. And I want to talk through each of those different 6. I've got my LinkedIn post here as a reference. But the first one, which you may be shocked by, is the 9-to-5er. There are 9-to-5ers out there who are really good at solving problems, are really good at being in various different stakeholder environments and all this kind of stuff there. And they're best suited to solve these unique problems strategically using frameworks and all of this kind of stuff there, in addition to great problem solving skills. When I think back to when I was a commissioner, or actually before I was a commissioner, but within the same team, a manager once called me a solution finder. He kept on saying, it's like, Michael, you're a solution finder. You're great at finding, solving problems and all that kind of stuff. And so he would throw things my way, sometimes with no context, with the absolute confidence that I was able to solve these problems. But what he was doing is really preparing me for a certain way of thinking and a certain approach when it comes to solving specific problems within the workplace. And what I found is that actually it really comes down to a number of things. Number one, it comes down to being very good at communicating with different people. So that is both formally and informally. And so that communication is having the ability to not be afraid to ask people questions and just get deeper. Because sometimes, especially within the UK, we can be quite polite in terms of asking questions. And even if you go back and forth, our politeness puts us in a position where we're like, oh yeah, I get it. Or actually, don't worry. Or, you just kind of brush it off like there isn't more information you can sort of like seek. So I learned this was a thing, and I actually ignored it. And I just kept on asking until I fully understood. I didn't care if I looked stupid, because 9 times out of 10, I didn't really look stupid. Most people were assuming the same stuff I was assuming, or not quite understanding the stuff I was understanding. So great communication is key. But by that, I mean asking good, solid questions that get to the root of understanding better. Okay, that gets to the root of comprehension, so to speak. The other thing I'd say is just being really good at looking at data. Okay, so assimilating different types of data to understand parts of the story. Now, obviously, when I first spoke about speaking to different stakeholders and stuff, you're going to get a feel and a flavor as to what's happening because you're hearing it through the eyes of a human. Okay. How else would you hear it? But you're getting a sense of the perceptions that are being developed through the stories or responses or answers that individuals and stakeholders are providing you with, but matched with data, matched with hard facts. Okay. And of course you have to check these facts, and I'll talk about this stuff in a minute. You can start to create some sort of story. Now, when it comes to data, and this is the thing I was getting to, you have to ensure that how the data is processed or inputted or recorded is understood. Because if you don't have an understanding behind that process, then you're taking fact for face value. And it will always be fact based on how that data is processed and inputted. And so bear all of this stuff in mind. Really, really important stuff. So we've got speaking to people and asking great questions. We've got understanding data. Another sort of like sphere or factor is being great at translating, high grade or strategic information. Whether this is at meetings, okay, or whether this is in sort of like documents or strategy documents or policy documents or whatever it may be. I've kind of split the two up. So there is this part of being able to transcribe, note take, record information really well in different meetings, so you can sort of piece and organize information really well. Maybe it's put into a presentation potentially. And there's also the ability to read sort of like the original strategy documents or the commissioning documents or the policy documents to get an understanding of what the intention is, the objectives are, from the source. People may tell you stuff, but they may miss out gaps. And so those four things, when done well, can help you adopt a solid consultant mindset. Because this stuff you can take on board anywhere you go. You have a framework for understanding how to approach stuff. Now, of course, the final sort of piece that is missing is having some sort of framework, okay? And I realized this when I started to ask more questions centered around how are things done? And in some ways, that was answered through some of the, not even job specifications, but the service documents, okay? The SLAs, the service level agreements, or some of the policy documents that outlined my specific role at the time. And so that gave me a clear idea. I remember reading this stuff, even the contracts, reading this stuff in detail. I knew my team had not read this in detail. And I was like, right, that makes sense. So this is what we're supposed to do when this happens. And this is what's supposed, like, have you actually done that? And of course, many of you have, many of you haven't. That's perfectly fine. But rather than scrambling, there is an opportunity to learn how it's supposed to be done. Now, this will reveal to you how wrongly and how badly, things are being done. But if you're smart, or if you have the opportunity to, it gives you leverage, because you can always go back to these documents or to these people and say, hey, but it says here in clause 2.6.1 that we're supposed to be doing this when X happens, so bear all of this stuff in mind. Again, this same manager that I spoke about, who was my manager like 7, 8, 9 years ago, whatever it may be, he used to always talk about this clause because he's very good at reciting stuff. And I remember going back to the document and picking up that actually the thing he was reciting was actually true. We used to laugh at him all the time, but it was true. And actually he utilized that clause in specific conditions when it arose. So there is an opportunity to leverage this stuff when need be. So the 9 to 5er does and can have consultant mindset tendencies. And I think this is where, you'll know whether you have this sort of like consultant mindset. I knew from early that I was meant to do something slightly different, to just, not being in a position where I'm unable to think more consultative by nature. Okay. I guess one final thing is the ability to brainstorm and, huddle and think of different ideas amongst other peers in order to get to some sort of solution. So this doesn't necessarily fit within the sphere of a framework or a methodology or whatever it may be. It just requires the ability to think, to voice out your opinion, and to organize those thoughts and brainstorm them so you can come to some sort of solution. You don't need to be a consultant to do this stuff. So this is why I say the mindset. I'm very specific with it, because the mindset, as I've said many times before, is your established or hard-setting set of attitudes that you have, which is really expressed through your behaviors. So that's the first type of consultant, okay? The second type of consultant is the firm consultant. And this is the consultant that most people are familiar with, okay? So we're talking about your big five, okay? We're talking about, those who have the really big contracts and all this kind of stuff there. And the great thing about these firms is that they've been able to get these contracts based on the fact that they have a strong brand. They know the right movers and shakers. They understand the back end of how things operate. And if you think about a consultant who comes within this space, especially if it's a graduate consultant or a newbie or whatever it may be, typically they have certain sections or categories that they fit themselves into, okay, or that they choose and decide. So maybe this is organizational change, maybe this is finance, maybe this is something centered around digital transformation, whatever it may be. And they sit within that space. And of course, if they're not on the bench, i.e. they're not active in terms of delivery, then they're typically in a space where they're meeting loads of stakeholders, they're solving loads of different types of problems. It may be within a specific type of category and sphere of, let's say, program management or change management or business analysis or accounting or whatever it may be. And they get exposure to all these different environments. And so they're learning very quickly. They're learning very quickly. They're meeting a lot of high profile people very quickly. They have great ways of evidencing stuff, because there is no way that the firm consultancy will allow them to be in a position where they don't understand what needs to be, like how they're tracking results, should I say. Like, how are they creating value for money? And this is why, I don't know if you guys have experienced this, but I know I have, especially working as a contractor slash consultant alongside these individuals. They will have huddles. They'll have huddles either on a weekly basis or every so often, to just really make sure that everything is going as planned under the guise of their brand, under their firm consultancy. It's a neat model, and it's something that, you know, you can learn as a solo consultant or a 9 to 5 or whatever it may be, those sort of attributes to just become more efficient and have that high levels of performance. In addition to that, a lot of these initial newbies, okay, that come into the consultancies, again, after a couple of months or so, they're put on certain courses and trainings. So these may be proprietary ones, or this may be ones that are commercially known. So stuff like Prince2, Agile, Scrum, you know, Azure training, all of this kind of stuff from the get-go, so they have a good base knowledge. Whereas again, if we go back to the 9 to 5 or the first type of consultant mindseted person, they may not necessarily have that opportunity, because you're fighting with HR to get some training that they haven't spent for that year, because all organizations typically have a 5% levy that they need to spend towards education. So if you're ever like, oh my gosh, what's, you know, is there money for the training budget and stuff, ask your HR representative or organization and people representative, and they should be able to tell you what it is, because 9 times out of 10, many of them don't spend it. So put pressure on them. But these firm consultants, they're in a position where they're setting them up nicely, and because they charge very, very high fees, regardless of whether, you know, those consultants are earning a salary, maybe the partners are obviously getting a day rate or whatever it may be, there's different models in place. You know, it's one of those ones where it's like, yeah, it's like the brand stands out. The brand stands out. And so it's really about, they do all of this stuff really well. It's about reputation. It's about great branding. It's about knowing the right people. But they definitely have the sort of like groundwork and fields to be really good consultants. Of course, not everyone is part of the big 5 or big 4. There are smaller consultancies, whether these are, you know, SMEs or mid-size or whatever it may be, that follow a very similar model. They just don't own the market that way. Okay, so think of it in terms of that side of things. Okay, now these sort of like firm consultancies are very good at closing contracts or closing deals, whatever it may be. This may be done through various means, and I'll probably do another video centered on that stuff. But essentially, it's looking like, you know, they've got people definitely applying for procurement style type bids, or speaking to the right sorts of people, or whatever it may be. So they're in the know, they're active. They've got a whole group of people who are doing this stuff. So that's the second type of consultant, the firm consultant. The third type, is the inside IR35 contractor. Okay. Now, of course, you could have a firm consultant who becomes an inside IR35 contractor. You could also have a 9 to 5 who becomes an inside IR35 contractor. The point being made is, it is your first taste of independence to a degree. Okay, what do I mean by this? Well, essentially, if you are inside IR35, as I said many times on this channel before, you are in a position where you are taxed very similar, if not the same, to a 9 to 5 employee. So income tax, national insurance contributions, I think there's pension as well. There's all this other stuff. And there are different things you can do because you're under an umbrella company. They can do the whole salary sacrifice thing. There are certain level benefits that you can get based on the fact you're under this umbrella company. But under the eyes of HMRC, you are doing work very similar to a permanent 9 to 5er. Now, just a quick point on a permanent 9 to 5er and that permanent type. The reason why I've put them as number 1 as a type of consultant is because really and truly, you know, there is no such thing as a permanent contract. That doesn't exist. All contracts can be broken to a degree. If an organization goes bust, that contract is broken. If you do something really bad, that contract is broken. If you leave, that contract is broken. So anything could happen. It just means that there is a higher perceived sense of stability, which is why people do 9 to 5s. It makes perfect sense, you know. But if you've got other ambitions, then of course you would be transitioning through this sort of like, I wouldn't call it a hierarchy. I wouldn't even call it a ladder. I would call it a journey. This different type of contracting journey. So coming back to the inside IR35 contractor, you know, based on the conduct regulations of 2003, and for those of you who are contractors, you'll know what I'm talking about. Usually, you know, usually centered around that stuff, it means that you're in a position where actually you kind of get the same rights as a permanent 9 to 5, but you don't. Okay. And so what that really means is you may get sort of like the opportunity to, well, let me say it this way. You can take leave when you want, but you have to report into a line manager. You're not really involved in the office politics, and you're pretty much doing work that a 9 to 5 would do. Why is this consultant related? Because, and this has happened to me before, there are some situations where your hiring manager has no clue what the difference is between an inside IR35 contractor and an outside IR35 contractor. And so they will treat you like an outside IR35 contractor, i.e. a consultant. So with that in mind, you start to get the training early on in terms of how you position yourself, and the appetite becomes more attractive. The reason why inside exists is because back in 2017, I think it was the Conservative government decided to make some changes in terms of classifying this differentiation between those individuals who are contracting that did work similar to a 9 to 5 and those individuals who did it under a limited company where it was purely different. And so they had different conditions, which I'll talk about in the next type of consultant. And so I wouldn't knock inside of IR35 because I always see it as a great opportunity to get your feet wet, to understand the entrepreneurial mindset in a way, in terms of how you fend for yourself, how you're betting on yourself, so to speak, and just understanding the landscape. You know, it was in a inside IR35 contracted position where I first worked amongst pretty much most of the big five. So that was KPMG, PwC, Deloitte, and EY, very closely as well. So I could see firsthand what was happening. I could see everything in relation to their whole setup. And so it's a positive thing. You can still make, you know, 6 figures from that type of, you know, contracting, so to speak. So that's what that looks like specifically. Now, you also have the outside IR35 contractor. This is what I deem, and this is what I call the consultant, the independent consultant. Why? Because typically this individual is working under a limited company. Now, this limited company isn't necessarily your own. It could be subcontracting under another limited company. But the point be made is it is independent. Okay. Now, typically, at least within the UK, and this is probably similar in other countries as well, this consultant will be working through some sort of agency. And to some degree, based on the contract, you are either deemed as a subcontractor or a consultant working through that specific recruitment agency. So almost like a consultancy setup to a degree, but there are different conditions that make it slightly different. It's irrelevant, really and truly, unless, you know, you do a really bad job and all of this stuff happens, but that will be rare because you'd only do this stuff if you know you have experience and expertise within the space. But as an independent consultant, as an outside of IR35 contractor, you are in a space where you're doing all of that stuff that I spoke about before, but you're accountable to yourself. You have the freedoms and accountabilities to yourself. So you're not clocking in at a certain time. You don't have a line manager. You can subcontract people in. You will be, you know, paying for your own expenses and everything else when it comes to travel and stuff. And you'll also be, you know, producing or relying on your own resources, okay, such as a laptop, phone, all of that kind of stuff there. That is key. If you fail on any of those different elements, then HMRC may be like, actually, this person is an inside IR35 contractor disguising themselves as an outside IR35 contractor. Now, really and truly, why, again, did the two exist? Another reason is because well, it's not, this is not the reason why they exist, but why there are challenges with all of this stuff. Well, there are many contractors who are doing outside IR35 roles, but are deemed inside because the organization has deemed them inside because they don't want to get fined by HMRC. So sometimes they just throw you inside out of fear, when really that isn't the case. And there isn't necessarily the right protections to fight that stuff. And this, all these consultants or contractors just said, no, I'm not doing it. Okay. So bear that stuff in mind. Another thing to say about the outside IR35 contractor, which is an independent consultant, is that a lot of their stuff is very deliverables based. So typically, you know, and again, this is something you'll know if you're in this space, you'll have to write a proposal that highlights what types of stuff you do, you know, talk about scope, the objectives that you're looking to hit, and the deliverables. And of course, if you have a methodology in mind that you utilize based on your expertise, then you'll know exactly what to write, given a little bit of context with your recruiter or the hiring manager or whatever it may be. But again, being an independent consultant means that you're potentially working with other independents and you're utilizing those same skills. You're utilizing those exact same skills. What do we have next? Next, we have what I call the procurement contractor. How does this differ from the other type? Well, it differs because they are directly sourcing their work through some sort of procurement framework. I realized this when I was a commissioner back in 2016 to 2020, I want to say, or 2019, something like that. And this country being the UK, is heavily reliant upon intellectual property. Okay, we are a service-based economy. This is why, you know, our productivity right now is 0%. This is why for the past 5 months, you know, there have been job losses and everything else because our productivity is at 0%. And this is linked to multiple things, you know, Brexit, the immigration conversation, things centered around the energy crisis due to the wars that are happening and the interest rates and inflations. It's all linked. So we rely heavily on services. How do services come about? Well, through entrepreneurship. Through the I guess the ability, the wantingness, the willingness of the people and the culture of the people to provide for the masses, okay, or for an organization or for a specific client. And so when we think of services, heavily we come down to things like management consulting, okay, which that would be classed as, you know, project management, program management, business support services, business analysis, all of that kind of stuff there. There is legal, that's a big one, okay. A lot of countries rely on our legal understanding and knowledge and our institutions. There's our academics, so research and innovation, that is big. And there's also finances. And of course, outside of that, there is other stuff. But these are the 4 big things that this country relies on heavily. And so procurement is important because it is the process that consultants go through in order to get big contracts. So if you ever wondered why there are some organizations working on behalf of the NHS or certain government departments or whatever it may be, or even mental health, you know, organizations working for X, Y, and Z, whatever it may be, it's through procurement. And so this has a different feel to an outside IR35 contractor because although they're still doing the same thing to a degree, there is more that needs to be thought about in terms of enabling the organization to trust you. So, you know, it makes sense to have a good setup in terms of your limited company. Do you have cybersecurity set up as an example? Are you ISO 27001 compliant as an example? Are you in a position where you clearly have examples where you've supported and helped other clients? Okay. Do you understand the nature of the problem that's trying to be solved with this specific contract via this procurement or tender or bid? You have the ability with the money, because these contracts can be anywhere from 10,000 up to 50 million, depending on, you know, how on it you are. So if you go back to what I said about the firm consultants, yeah, they've understood the game. They know what software to buy to track all of this stuff. They know what people to talk to, etc., etc. Of course, there is still opportunity for the little man and woman. And so, bearing all this stuff in mind is a different feel, because with this money, you can actually set up an infrastructure or a team or subcontract people in to, again, deliver on whatever you want to deliver on. So it doesn't have to be a solo thing, so to speak. So you're thinking more like a partner, like like a business owner, so to speak. It's a bit more entrepreneurial by nature. I still believe that the outside IR35 contractor thinks this way, but again, it's different. Now, although I haven't been in the position where I've done the procurement stuff, I've been on the other side as the commissioner, where I've checked bids, I've looked through tenders, I've gone through the whole procurement cycle, from trying to understand what we want to, doing market engagement and then going through the bids and all that. Like, I've done it all. So I know exactly what sort of stuff these types of individuals are looking for a certain type of sort of like area. Anyway, that is the fifth type of consultant, so to speak. Again, I just want to say very quickly, because I'm trying to remind myself to do this stuff. If you like this sort of content and you want to get notified of this stuff, then I have a newsletter that I send out every single week on a Sunday at 2 p.m. that really talks to this stuff. So if you click on the link below, you can check it out for yourself. The final type of consultant that I'm sort of like naming or calling is the freelance consultant. Okay. So essentially, this freelance consultant is speaking directly to the business owner. And this is what we're all trying to do. This is why it's so fiercely competitive at the moment. So this freelance consultant sort of like gets onto sort of like contracts different ways. And I could split these into two different types of consultant, but I'm probably not going to right now. So number one, they'll check out different marketplaces. These marketplaces could be things like, I don't know, Upwork, people per hour. I think that's changed to Upwork now. There's Juno. There's a few others that exist as well, where essentially they are going through the process themselves. So it's still an application process, but they're relying on a marketplace specifically. Okay, that's one type. The other type involves more so speaking directly to the founder or the economic buyer. And so this may be done a bit more organically with a bit of proactiveness. So this is looking at going to different networking events, very specific ones where you know the economic buyers are going to be, or getting introductions from other people who are within a certain community, letting other people know about what you do and making sure they're clear so they know how to refer you on. There is also other situations where, maybe you're within a VC sort of like backed startup sort of like organization where, okay, it's not a startup, but basically it's a VC sort of like organization that backs startups. But essentially, because they've got money and put it into these different startups, these startups may need your consultation, okay, or advice. I've got a friend's brother who is doing this right now, and he's been doing this consistently for the last 5 or 6 months. So these things work, and the way you kind of like jump onto these opportunities is by proxy. What do I mean by this? This is if you, again, go to these events and stuff and speak to different people and talk about what you do. But also, if you do things like trusteeships or non-executive director roles, or if you do advisory roles, look for this stuff that is relevant for the space that you want to be in. Of course, there is also social media, which is almost like what you could argue, the B2C consultant, okay? Which I guess is number 7, but let's keep it to 6. Let's say this is a bonus. And this type of consultant is essentially somebody who is helping the individual. And again, there are marketplaces for this stuff like clarity.fm, but you can also use social media to draw people in. So let's think about it. I'm using videos to garner awareness around a certain topic, provide value, all this kind of stuff there. Invariably, there will be some individuals who believe that I'll be able to support them or help them in whatever it may be. And through that, I can set up some sort of consulting with them in order to accelerate that process. Now, some people may just call that coaching. I'm very specific with what I mean by coaching. But again, it's a fluid thing. My coaching trainer teacher once said to me that coaching is basically the ability for the client to help themselves. So this is where you get the questions, the listening, the feedback, all of that kind of stuff there. But a lot of people feel like they don't want that or need that. And there's also mentoring, which is on the other side, which uses coaching sort of like style stuff. But again, this is more based on the experience of the individual, telling them what they've done and how it can support them. But with consulting, I guess you're using a bit of all of this stuff, you know? So again, the freelance consultant has a lot of freedoms, but it's harder to set up this stuff to a degree, you could argue, because it requires a lot of trust. It requires a strong brand. You have to, make sure you articulate your stuff well. All of the stuff that I've spoken about before. So those are the 6 or 7, or you could argue 8, different types of consultant that exist that require the consultant mindset. And of course, you can identify where you are and try to decipher whether you want to transition into the proceeding consultant type. Because of course, with those different types, the earning potential potentially increases. It's not a hard fact, but it potentially increases at least anyway. So yeah, let me know your thoughts. Let me know your thoughts below in terms of this whole topic. I find it fascinating and interesting, obviously. And let me know what type of consultant you are. Anyway, if you want to see more videos centered around portfolio careers, consulting, contracting, the whole shebang, then don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. And as always, my friends, understand, reach, and expand. Peace.